Good morning and a very warm welcome to On the Agenda. I'm going to hand over the floor to Hilde Vautmans, President of the European Liberal Forum.
Thank you very much and good morning everybody and welcome to the 8th edition of our On the Agenda series. Thank you for joining us. My name is Hilde Vautmans and I'm the President of the European Liberal Forum. For those who don't know us yet, we are the political foundation and think tank of the ALDE party. And On the Agenda is ALF's latest webinar series in which we look at the hot topics that are on or left out of the European leaders' agendas. Today, together with Bernard Guetta, we are going to be getting to the core of the EU-Russia relations, where we currently stand and where we should be heading. I think you will all agree when I state that over the past years, several new tensions between EU and Russia have arisen, which have further strained relations. For example, the annexation of Crimea, poisoning of Skripal on EU soil, Navalny, of course, the situation in Belarus, actions in the Sea of Azov. We could say that today's relations between EU and Russia are frozen. I must say even more. They're better, they're not so good even, they're more bad than be frozen. We have less contacts now with Russia than during the Cold War. Summits do not take place, and as the implementation of the Minsk agreements is not progressive, relations are really blocked. I think this is a pity. The EU and Russia are neighbors, and this will not change. And the EU is Russia's largest trading partner. In 2018, ALDE presented its blueprint for an EU strategy towards Russia. My position is that, of course, we should not be naive, nor close our eyes for Russia's actions. But a more proactive strategy is needed to get the relationship out of the current stalemate and to motivate Russia to start behaving as a responsible player and play along the rules. We have been imposing sanctions and are imposed counter-sanctions for over 4 years now. This never ends and does not work. What we propose is a strategy of conditional engagement with parallel processes where progress on the one side can open up cooperation on the other side, so that not only economic sanctions could be lifted in exchange for full implementations of the Minsk agreements, but the overall EU-Russia relationship would be put into a wider perspective, and the full potential of relations between EU and Russia could be unlocked. This strategy should be underpinned by 3 pillars. Progress in the political and security pillar would mean opening up cooperation in the economic pillar. In order to make this process work, the EU would have to make use of the tools in its box: diplomatic, trade and economic, financial system, confidence-building measures. And we must be ready to use these instruments both ways. Engage and reward cooperation and development, but also be ready to scale up economic and personally targeted sanctions, if necessary. Honestly, I must say, I always loved the ALDE blueprints, and I still think that there are valuable elements in it. But I think it's good that today you have this webinar, that you also will be thinking about how can we change this relationship. My father learned me many things, but he learned me one very important thing: never make war with your neighbors unless you want to move. Well, we can't move. We are Europe, and Russia will still be a neighbor. So I hope you have a very good webinar. I hope that we have good views. And I think I have to introduce now the moderator. It's Beatriz Rios, and she's an EU affairs reporter, and I'm very sure she will moderate this webinar very good. So good luck today. Have a very nice webinar, and I'm looking forward of the conclusions. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you, Hilde. I thank you very much for your introductory statement, because I think it maps very well what's the current state of the relations between EU and Russia. And it gives a lot of meat for the discussion today, because we're very happy to have a very very interesting panel with people with different background coming from different parts of Europe. And I think that's very relevant when we talk about EU-Russia relations, because the perception of the threat of Russia is not the same from different parts of Europe. And then I think that adds a lot of interesting thoughts for the discussion. So thanks a lot again, Hilde, for your introductory remarks. Now I would like to give the floor straight away to Guetta, who is a member of the European Parliament for the Renew Europe group from France. So please, Bernard, you have the floor. Bernard, you're mute. Thank you.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm confused. So thank you to you and thank you to Hilde. And I will develop 5 points this morning. The first one is that it would be in our best interest, in the best interest of the European Union and the Russian Federation. And it is actually a necessity to be able to sign as soon as possible a new Helsinki agreement. I mean, an agreement on security and cooperation between the two pillars of our continent. Second point, we cannot try to achieve this goal through direct and official discussion because the Russian president doesn't even try to appease the situation in Ukraine, Libya, Syria, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova. It would be also impossible, almost impossible, actually completely impossible, to have a negotiation, an open negotiation with a regime directly responsible for an opponent's poisoning. Third point, if we cannot have official negotiation, we must have unofficial discussion to prepare the possibility of an open discussion. We must open those unofficial discussions through neutral countries, personality trusted by the two parts, maybe non-governmental organization. Any means would be good and necessary. Fourth point, in any case, and without losing 1 minute, 1 second, we must develop direct contact with the Russian civil society to tell the Russian people our willingness, our deep desire to build a new relation founded on peace, security, and cooperation. Fifth point, the last one. There is no any certainty we could succeed in this goal, but we must try because this is an historical responsibility and because sooner than we think, this new Helsinki agreement could be a necessity for the Russian leadership for two reasons. The first one is that it would be much better for the Russian Federation to be a partner of the European Union than a vassal of China. And the second reason is that Russia is in a very poor situation now. By Russia, I mean both the country and the regime. The country and the regime are very lonely now in the Middle East because they used to have an important ally, Iran, and now the Iranian regime is very weak, with no money, no ally. The Iranian regime just lost Iraq and Lebanon. And so Russia is now in a very lonely tête-à-tête with Bashar al-Assad, and Bashar al-Assad even is weaker and weaker in his country. Second point, Russia is in a deadlock in Ukraine, because what they could do now, go to Kiev? No, we don't think so. Of course, we don't think so. So what they could do more? Actually, absolutely nothing. They are in a deadlock. The economical situation of Russia is poorer and poorer because the price of oil is going down and will go down for years and years. The popularity of Mr. Putin is clearly declining in all parts of the country. I mean, geographically and in sociological terms also. And Mr. Putin and his regime are actually apparently completely unable to appease or to solve the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh, in Ukraine, in Belarus, in Kyrgyzstan. What more? I'm afraid I'm forgetting something, but okay, no problem. In any case, Mr. Putin is not anymore able to organize the near abroad of the Russian Federation. And so, in some months, some years, again, sooner than we think, for the Russian leadership, it will be a necessity to try to reach an agreement with us, I mean, with the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ferdinand. I think it's very interesting what you were saying about describing so much the internal situation of Russia, because I have the impression that when we talk about EU-Russia relations, we often talk in terms of foreign affairs, but we don't look so much about the situation in the country and how that can affect the position of Russia in affairs. And I was wondering, I wanted to follow up on what you were explaining just right now, and how the very weak economic situation in the country, how the leadership of Mr. Vladimir Putin is being contested, all the issues that they're having in external affairs, how that can actually become some sort of motivation to engage with the EU. How confident are you that actually that could lead Russia into being more open to strengthen EU-Russia relations?
More open in political terms, I'm not at all sure, but they will be in the necessity to reach some kind of agreement, either with the United States or China or the European Union. They cannot stay like that alone. So let's think about those three possibilities. With the United States, maybe yes, if Mr. Trump is reelected. But even with Trump's re-election, it would be difficult, because a close and confident relationship between the US and the Russian Federation would be difficult, because it would go against the entire history of the two countries, against the deep thinking of the American establishment, and against also the deep thinking of the Russian establishment. So now, a close relation with China, of course it would be possible. And it would be certainly in the best interest of China. But would it be in the best interest of Russia? We can doubt it, because an alliance between the elephant and the mouse. It's never a good business for the mouse. So the last solution is the European Union. And what would be the danger for Russia to try to reach a new Helsinki agreement, security and cooperation, economical cooperation? Frankly speaking, I don't see any danger for Russia. They would have to give real guarantees about the independence and security of Georgia, Ukraine, Belarus, and the other former Soviet republics. Of course, they would have to do that. But is it impossible for them? I don't think so. I don't think so. What would be the danger for us? I mean, for the European Union? I don't see any. Because we need what with the Russian Federation now? Respect of the new borders. By new borders, I mean the former internal borders of the Soviet Union, which are now international borders of the new independent countries. We need that, of course, but I don't see any impossibility to get it. In economic terms, it would be a very good business for both the European Union and the Russian Federation. And last point, the entire new urban Russian middle class do aspire to that. Second point, the most enlightened part of the security apparatus, because there is an enlightened part of the security apparatus, would wish also to reach this kind of agreement. And of course, the biggest part of the business circle would wish that also. So let's think about it. The new urban middle classes, quite a big part or an important part of the security apparatus, and the majority, the huge majority of the business circle, it's not nothing in Moscow now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think this links a little bit with the approach that Hilde was mentioning about the need for the EU to be proactive and take advantage of the opportunity. And I'm sure that we will be talking about that later, and also about how the elections in the US can actually shape the new reality in the world. I'd like to introduce now to Danielle Mittal, who is a consultant and a former Minister of Foreign Affairs in the Republic of Bulgaria. So please, Danielle, you have the floor.
Hello, hi. I'm happy to join all of you. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the insights until this moment. Well, as in my previous incarnation and afterwards, I've been dealing with Russia a lot from a very different angle. You know, Bulgaria is quite close to Russia, not only geographically but also in terms of influences, and unfortunately, lots of old dependencies and problems have been accumulated and are still a factor in the Bulgarian politics, but not only Bulgarian politics, Balkan politics as well. So I tend to look at the relationship between Europe and Russia in a little bit of a more, let's say, dire colors, and namely when it comes to what are the geopolitical goals of Russia, which include the European Union, but the European Union is not the main piece of the puzzle here. Russia, in general, projects itself as a superpower, even if it's not. But it wants to see itself like this. And Putin tried in the last years to somehow restore this type of status of Russia in the global scene. But Russia cannot function in the modern post Second World War world and post Cold War world based on rules and a certain type of international law, which has been designed by the West practically. So it needs to reconstruct that international architecture, and tries to do that via basically spoiling all the international relations and trying to remodify them in their own way. So for Russia, this world based on international norms and international law is not the world it can be influential in. Russia could be influential in a 19th century world, a Westphalian world, where the national sovereignty is the absolute value, and human rights, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, political pluralism, and so on. All these things are not being discussed on the international scene. Those are things swept under the carpet and forgotten in the dialogue between countries. This is the world which Russia wants to function in. That's where the big geopolitical blocs like European Union and NATO are weaker or non-existent, and basically that's when Russia can operate with much more confidence. That is why I believe recently the international relations in the last years are characterized by one word, which Russia has a lot of. Russia has contributed a lot for this word to become characteristic for the international relations, and that word is impunity. Russia and followed by others, by other autocratic regimes, started demonstrating that practically international law might exist, but it depends only on the goodwill of the countries. If all of a sudden the goodwill of the countries is taken out from the equation, we see that there's no way to enforce international law. The only instrument we have, by we I mean the collective West, is sanctions, and we're trying to use those, but I don't believe we're using them in the best possible manner until this moment, because of all these desires for resets and let's be friends and try to be friends all the time, with trying to bury our heads in the sand and not see that basically we are in a new type of geopolitical confrontation between systems of governance and desires to reshape the world and create new type of dependencies and dominations, because we even until this moment we're refusing to see it. We are not using the instrument of sanctions in the best possible manner. It is true that the internal situation in Russia is absolutely atrocious, and especially with the pandemic and with the decrease of the prices of the oil, the internal situation in Russia has declined enormously, and that somehow has also released a bit of pressure from the West and our own elections, the disinformation campaigns, and everything else. But before the pandemic, we all can remember that we had all sorts of pressures coming from the Russian side, and the most dangerous of which is not the energy being used as a geopolitical weapon. It's not the disinformation even. It's the corruption, the weaponized corruption, which we have allowed to penetrate our political and institutional environment through our economic cooperation. When we look at the interaction of the countries on the international scene, we need to understand that when we interact on the international scene, we don't exchange only goods, people, and capital. We exchange also the ways how our institutions function. And the more we interact, the more this kind of interinstitutional penetration becomes significant. And to a great extent, with this comes the way how the institutions function in Russia. And when there's a lot of money involved and a lot of political decisions to be made, I'm afraid that the term Schröderization was not invented in vain, and it has lots of reason behind it. So we need to, for sure, the European Union needs to think how to build certain type of firewalls against the weaponized corruption. We can talk. I can talk for hours about this, but we have limited time, and I would stop here and wait for questions.
I have many questions after your intervention, for sure. I'd like to do one follow-up because all of the other topics, I think we're going to treat them with the panel. But I found very interesting what you were saying about Russia not being able to operate in this international law system and how they're just trying to spoil it. And I was wondering then, how can the EU, which is the master of multilateralism, the master of international law, can engage with Russia without threatening its own model and its own way of doing politics?
If we want to engage with someone, that someone needs to have the desire for engagement. I don't believe this regime right now in the Kremlin has any desire to engage sincerely in constructive relationship. This relationship is transactional and very cynical. The Kremlin looks at the global affairs in a very transactional and cynical way, and all the attempts on the part of the European Union as such, or the European Union countries, member states, to engage in a more constructive and open way looks naive to the Kremlin establishment, looks even stupid. It's a sign of weakness. So the demonstration of certain type of assertiveness building those protections in the European Union, that's the more serious way to approach the relationship with Russia, with the current establishment, of course. And telling very, very clearly to the Russian establishment, you can't do what you're doing right now. You can't just poison people left and right. You can't use chemical weapons and lie to the whole international community that you have destroyed them, and all of a sudden we find out that you're not only continuing the research on chemical weapons, but you're using them, and you're using them in Europe. And you're using them again against your own citizens, not even once. I mean, Alexei Navalny is the most recent case. I mean, we can go back and see the attempts on the life of Vladimir Karamurza and others. I see Olga Radaeva here. She has joined us. The Russian opposition can name lots of other names when it comes to the usage of these weapons. So we need to have a way more assertive way of dialogue with Russia. The dialogue needs to be there, of course. We can't shut it down. Russia is our neighbor, but the problem is that every time Russia goes down, they come and they tell us, and it's not exactly Russia, it's the Kremlin establishment. They usually come and say, give us the fruits of your civilization, give us the Eiffel, give us the product of your civilization, but please don't teach us how to live. We are separate. We're a separate civilization. We have our own ways. Yes, but the iPhone is the product of a civilizational construct, of civilizational architecture, the product of economic freedom, of freedom of speech, of freedom of lots of freedoms, and the protection of those freedoms. And afterwards, again, we go in this historical cycle of confrontation and who is going to dominate. So we need to understand this, and I know in Russia, having lots of friends there, lots of people in Russia understand this and want to get out of this trap. But if we want to help them, we are not helping them through being soft on the Kremlin establishment. We need to be way more assertive in order to help those people who want a different Russia democratic. Democratic Russia, which is part of the constructive international community. And what is the attitude of the Kremlin establishment towards democracies? We saw not so long time ago. I mean, a couple of years ago, there was an op-ed by Vladislav Surkov, who basically expressed that sentiment and said, democracy doesn't exist, freedom of speech doesn't exist, it's all hypocrisy. And we are going, and Russia intends to unveil that. And everything we are doing is just to show that democracy as such is just a manipulation. You're crooks, and a crook could be fought by another crook who is bigger. And this is us. That's what the Kremlin establishment is telling us, and is revealing the weaknesses of our democracies. So besides being more assertive with Russia, we need to take a look at our own democratic environment and basically try to fix our own democratic weaknesses. I'm sorry if I've been too long.
That's perfectly fine. I think it was very interesting, your intervention, and I would like to touch upon a couple of topics. One of the things that you mentioned about this, that you just were saying about the need to address our own issues, to be responsible enough inside the European Union so that we can translate that into foreign affairs, but also the question of the EU needing to be more assertive. I think that's an ongoing debate for ages, and it doesn't relate only to Russia. It's the same when it comes to China, and can be a little bit controversial, because when you were talking about transactional and very cynical relations, I couldn't stop thinking about Nord Stream 2, but we can talk about that later. I'd like to introduce now to our third speaker, who is Amanda Valentin. She is the Deputy Secretary General of the Swedish International Liberal Center. So please, Amanda, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. The theme of the seminar is it realistic to expect any improvement in the relations between the two blocs? And I think you have to ask yourself, of course, which both Guetta and Mitov has mentioned, you have to ask yourself, improvement in the relationship between who? I think if we're talking about improvement in the relationship between the EU and the current Russian regime, I would say no, you cannot expect any improvement. You can expect short-term, less slower of conflict, but the thing is, if you're talking about the relationship between the EU and Russia as a country, the key issue is democracy in Russia. There will never be a normal relationship between the EU and Russia before there is democracy in Russia. And that will not happen under the current regime. I'm sorry if this is very obvious, but I just I just wanted to say that. Right now, Russia is, as we all know, an electoral autocracy, which means that it holds elections, but they are not for real. The function of the elections is not to distribute power, but it's merely a ceremony. And we know that is really like the basic problem of everything, you could say. Very often when we talk about democracy, we tend to talk about civil society. And of course, any democratic states needs a vibrant civil society to organize people around more narrow interests than ideologies like political parties do, and also to formulate specific demands and to scrutinize and monitor the politicians. But we also need politicians. We also need people who are willing and able to stand for office and to take upon themselves the responsibility of the legislative and the executive power. And because if there is no competitive elections, there is no accountability. And if public opinion is distorted by state propaganda the way it is in Russia today, it doesn't really matter how professional the civil society is. The ruling elites will serve itself. Okay, the civil society can have some advances, but basically the ruling elite will keep serving itself as long as there's no accountability. So what about the ruling elite in Russia today? I would just like to have some numbers. So if you look at the last Duma elections, because both Guetta and Mitov also said this, that the current Russian regime doesn't have a very strong support among the people. That is something, a key thing that we really need to understand. And I just want to bring some numbers about that. If you look at the last Duma election, about a third of the people eligible to vote actually voted. So the actual turnout was about 30%. Now they added 10 or 11 million false votes, and it's 110 million people who are eligible to vote in Russia. So let's just think it's 100 million. So they claim that the turnout was 40%. Now all those extra 10 million votes that they added was of course votes for United Russia. Now among the 30% that actually voted, a third voted for United Russia. So United Russia should have had 30%. That's what United Russia got, 30% of the actual votes, which is 1 out of 9 people in Russia. 1 out of 9 people who had the right to vote actually made the effort to get out of bed in the morning and go and vote for United Russia. 8 out of 9 people choose not to go and vote for United Russia. When you do surveys and you ask them, do you support Vladimir Putin or not? And you can say yes or no, that's not a very strong indicator. But the fact that 8 out of 9 people choose not to go and vote for United Russia shows how big their support actually is. Now, since they added 10 million votes and since they won all the single mandate seats, they still got 76%, I think, of the places in the Duma, although they only got 30% of the votes and 10% of the people eligible to vote. The support of the regime is very, very fragile. It is totally based on the suppression of the alternatives. That is the complete base of they are suppressing the alternatives. If there were alternatives, they would have no chance of winning, no chance of winning. And we really, really need to understand that. So what can the EU do? I think that first of all, we should think of the policies that we have towards Russia as two different policies. We have one policy towards the regime and one policy towards the people. And some of the tools that we are trying to use against the regime are actually things that has to do with the people, not with the regime. For example, the visa regime. When we're trying to use that as a tool to impact Vladimir Putin, we are using it in the wrong way, I believe, because Vladimir Putin is not very interested in free movement. We should see that as a tool in our relationship to the Russian people. We should use the visa regime to show that Russia is transparent, that the EU is transparent, fair, and open. And everybody, and people that have been to EU once and behave themselves, they should have it should be very easy for them to get a second visa for a long period of time and so on, so that we show that that the EU is fair and open. So we should see that as a tool towards the people, not the regime, because Vladimir Putin kind of wants to close the country. We are the ones who wants Russians to travel to Europe and study in Europe and so on to get experience from here. And as politicians, we should also take time to listen. We should take time to listen to the Russian opposition, obviously. We should always stress the importance of democratic elections, but not to put pressure on the current regime, because they have no interest in democratic elections and they will never have any interest in democratic elections. But in order to support the parties and the organizations that are working to raise awareness in Russia about the fact that democratic elections are possible and necessary. Because many people in Russia, they know that the elections are falsified, but they do not believe that it's possible to have democratic elections. And they don't really understand why some of them don't really get why it's necessary, why it's actually corruption and everything is connected to the fact that elections are falsified and that there is no accountability. So is there a possibility to improve the relationship between the EU and Russia? When I say Russia, I don't mean the regime, I mean Russia. I think long-term, there definitely is, because we have to believe that Russia can be democratized. Now, Russia missed the first wave of democratization in the 10s and in the 1910, 1920 kind of period. They were on a good way. They were actually, people say there's no tradition of democracy in Russia. That's not true. If it wasn't for the war and very like political circumstances, they had the election to the Constitutional Assembly, the participation was high. They were on the way to democratization. So they are just as able of having a democratic country as any European country. But now they also missed I guess you could call it the fourth wave of democratization, or fifth maybe, in the 1990s. After the fall of the Soviet Union, they missed that wave of democratization as well. But maybe now maybe we have to hope for a fifth or a sixth wave of democratization that is happening right now. Because as everybody says, the awareness in Russia about the need for democracy and the support for the regime is actually rising. I do believe so. You can see that in Khabarovsk. You can see it if you look at the Moscow elections, local elections, and so on. There is a chance. There is a critical mass that wants democracy, and then our relationship could be normalized.
Thank you, Amanda. I think it was very important to put the focus on the civil society, because we were mentioning that was a very important pillar when it comes to EU-Russia relations. I was wondering, how do you think that concretely could the EU contribute to that democratization process in Russia, considering that in parallel we're having this relationship with the regime to try to establish some sort of like economic relationship, also collaborate at the security level, which sometimes both things are interlinked, and how do you see sanctions affecting that process?
I think sanctions, I think when we do things towards the regime, it's a way of talking to the civil society and show them that we are supporting their demands. So definitely sanctions is a very important tool that we should use against the regime without closing the country for the people. Now, when Russians are getting poorer because of the sanctions and because of the economic situation and everything, this is like very long term, and it's not a very strong, it's not a quick fix, but just more, just put more money in funds for student exchanges and stuff like that, just to more contacts between people. I think that's what we can do. And yeah, but basically, as much as we would like to democratize Russia, it's only the Russians that can democratize Russia. And all we can do is show support, give support, and not put sticks in the wheels, but do things that actually serve the democratic opposition and that doesn't hurt their work. That's all we can do. Facilitate.
Thanks a lot, Amanda. So now I would like to recall people attending the seminar that they can ask questions through the Q&A box. So if you have any questions or comments that you would like to share with our speakers, especially questions, because I see a lot of comments, but I'd like to encourage you to ask questions to our speakers. I have actually one question in the pipeline. Since we are putting the focus on the economic, this question is from Ricardo Silvestre. Since we are putting a focus on the economic question inside Russia and how that can be a factor of pressure to Mr. Putin's regime, what do the panelists think about the lack of uniformity inside the EU regarding what can be a lifeline to the Kremlin, and that it's a Nord Stream 2 pipeline, by allowing to having member states being more dependent on Russia energy, we lose leverage regarding the security dilemma and offensive actions by Moscow? Maybe Bernard, you can start answering this question. You're muted again.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Maybe I will not answer this question directly right now. I would like to emphasize one point. The main question in our relations with the Russian Federation is this question: is Russia as a political power stronger or weaker, let's say, than 2 or 3 years ago? Second question, is Mr. Putin personally, as the leader of this country, stronger or weaker than, let's say, 2 or 3 years ago? On those two questions, I would answer definitely weaker for the country and weaker for Mr. Putin. And so there is a room, there is a possibility, again, that this country and this leadership, probably not Mr. Putin personally, but I said the Russian leadership, would try to open discussions with us, the European Union, because it will be very simply a necessity for them. The question is not to know or to try to know if somebody, the European Union or the Russian people, could change this regime. The question is not to try to know, to answer the historical question, is Russia ready for democracy or not? Let's forget it. Let's see the realities. The country and the leadership are weaker and weaker, and they will be weaker and weaker in the coming years. And so it gives us the possibility to try new policies toward Russia. That's it.
Thank you very much. Do you, Daniel, think that opening to the EU is actually a necessity for Russia? Do you agree with Bernard on that one?
So, what the Kremlin regime really wants is to have all the economic openness possible, and at the same time not to apply any of the international norms and standards in its own internal environment. Because the Putin's regime is a parasite in the for years is a parasite in the international architecture. It takes advantage of the economic openness of the paradigm which was born in the beginning of the 90s, that we are going to open up the economies, and the open world market is going to be a vehicle for the democratic values. So through the market, through the free market, democratic values will kind of enter the autocratic systems, and people will start demanding more and more democratic practices and liberalization from their own autocrats. Obviously, that paradigm was wrong. Because countries, autocracies like we see in Russia right now, with this Kremlin establishment, and like in China, what they did was basically avoid those rules, use the economic openness in order to accumulate resources, and use those resources not only to tighten the grip on the freedoms of their own population, and basically strip their own population from more and more freedoms, and tighten the grip around the neck of their people, but also to start using the resources which they have accumulated through the free economic cooperation on the world scene, use those resources against democracies, and that's exactly what is happening right now. I agree with Mr. Guetta that Russia is weak in this very moment. I mean, the Kremlin regime has its own problems, doesn't have the resources to, right now, I mean, in the last year, doesn't have the resources to spend to disrupt our own democratic functioning as it used to do in the past. But I would like to remind here this famous saying that Russia is never as strong as it likes to portray itself, but it's never as weak as we would like to think of it. And Russia is still a big country, still a country with a lot of resources. Those resources are not spent for improving the life of the Russians, but quite often are, to a great extent, are used in order to maintain huge and useless military service, for intelligence operations, and for geopolitical influence and for corruption, and as we see, for pipelines. And here comes the question of Ricardo Silvestre, who is asking a correct question. Nord Stream 2, as well as Turkish Stream, and for that the failed South Stream, are geopolitical projects. They have nothing to do with economy. It's all about circumventing Ukraine. It's clear. And no matter what our friends who have certain type of economic benefit from it will say, but that's what it is. Those are geopolitical projects, and it is not only gas which flows through those pipes, but what flows is geopolitical influence and corruption as well. That's what flows through those pipes. So basically, we will need Russian gas. Europe will import Russian gas in the future, but the thing is, under what rules? What will be the main pillars and rules which we will apply toward that gas? And it's a good thing that the European Union started certain type of procedures against the monopoly of Gazprom. And when we discuss that the European Union doesn't have uniformity towards Nord Stream 2, that's absolutely true, but it's not surprising. I mean, we work all the time. This is our natural state. The natural state of events is usually lack of uniformity around certain around issues. I mean, take a look at the position on Libya. Take a look at the position on many other things. We lack uniformity, but that's normal. The European Union doesn't have to have all the time uniformity around certain things, even if it would have been better to have it. But after careful analysis, we should have probably already had certain type of common position on Nord Stream 2, and the U.S. administration is actually the only thing which stops right now the Nord Stream 2 and actually Turkish Stream of being really to reach its end as geopolitical weapons. But to me, the most important thing is to go towards diversification, to diversify the European infrastructure in order for us to be able to get oil and gas from all around the world and stop being dependent on sources like Russia. That is ongoing process in the European Union, and I don't believe even Nord Stream 2 and Turkish Stream will be any significant of any major significance in the next years, because this type of diversification is already practically implemented to a great extent. Only 1-2 countries like Bulgaria, for example, remain weak points in that regard. But I believe that's also quite solvable in the next years.
You touch upon a point that I wanted to raise at some point, but we're running out of time, and it's the question of the perception of the relationship with Russia from different parts of Europe. And it's the same that it's happening when it comes to the relations with Turkey. We have seen that over the past few months, and again with conflicts in Syria and in Libya as well, where different countries have different interests, but it's something that we struggle with in foreign affairs very often. I'd like to move to Amanda now for a reaction on the question of the Nord Stream 2, on the parallelism between having a relationship with Russia and sort of like feeding the regime, while at the same time we have this energy dependence and this need for economic relationships with Russia.
I'm sorry, was that a question to me?
Yeah, so what is your reaction on the Nord Stream 2 question that I raised before?
Oh, I don't really want to comment on that. I'm sorry. I think Danielle said it all. I don't have anything reasonable
I
to add.
can move the next question, which maybe you want to react on that one, and I think it's a very interesting one. So Philippe Benyon, he's asking, to what extent is Putin a product of Russia exceptionalism and vice versa, and will another Putin arise after he falls from power, or will his fall be the result of a useful reform? And I think this is very relevant to understanding the very long term, the relationship that the EU might have with Russia, to what extent that's actually shaped by Putin and it's not just the whole system.
I think we shouldn't exaggerate the specificities, does that word exist, of the Russian political culture. I would say, like, it's very, you said Russian exceptionalism and so on. I mean, yes, I think a political culture is a set of points of reference that we reference to, right? And in Russia, we always talk about strong leader or not strong leader. And then we ask people, do you want a strong leader? And they're supposed to answer yes or no on that one. But we never ask Swedes, do you want a strong leader? Because Swedes wouldn't answer, yes, we want a weak leader. You know, we have, it's points of reference. I have, when I lived in Russia, I had not a friend, because he wasn't my friend, but I knew a person who was a Swedish businessman. And he had a portrait of Putin in his office because it was a signal. It was a point of reference. It meant I'm one of you, you can trust me. So it's not deep down inherited in our blood, another way of looking at politics. Because if you talk to Russians, everybody wants to have power over their own lives. And if you realize that democracy and accountability and human rights and division of power is the way to get power of your own life, people want that. I don't think we should, and so what I mean is that those points of reference, they can change very, very quickly. You can see that when you went from the Tsarist regime to the communist regime, so to say, that you just, but of course you filled up kind of the same ideas of the three, what do you say in English, the three things in Christianity, the spirit, God, and the Son. The troika, the troitsa, how you filled that up with other, you had that in the Tsarist regime and you actually had it in the communist regime as well. But you could always fill up those things with something that is positive and that works. So I don't think you should exaggerate that it's something really, really deep inherited, that Russians have like a slave mentality that some people say. My friends in Russia, I'm sorry, this really makes me angry. My friends in Russia does not want to be slaves. You know, we shouldn't exaggerate that kind of cultural mystification of Russia.
And I think we have seen that as well in Belarus in the past few months, actually, the reaction
Absolutely.
of the people and how that changes so very quickly. Thank you so much for your interventions today. We're running out of time. I'm very sorry. I had a lot of questions that I couldn't ask you, and I think I could be talking about this forever, but we have to come to an end. And I'd like to give the floor now to Lauren Mason, who is the project coordinator of the European Liberal Forum, for a last word. Please, Lauren, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Beatrice, and thank you everyone for your very interesting discussions. I really feel that we could carry on for a few more hours on this topic, but I'm really taking away the sense that there is a window of opportunity now for Europe's relations with Russia, in the sense that Russia is experiencing a phase of weakness. They're looking for perhaps new international partners. And as Valentin said, this is perhaps our chance to present ourselves as the only viable partner. In that sense. But I also hear what Danielle Mittal said about Europe not coming across as weak when it is willing to engage, and that's an important point to do with the relations of both sides and how they're perceived. But I would like to sort of end on the positive point that that Amanda raised, that we should distinguish between our policies towards the regime and our policies towards the people of Russia. And I think it was really nice the point about sort of increasing contacts and trying to have more people-to-people contacts on the ground. So plenty of food for thought. I just want to say thank you to all three of our panelists. Thank you also to Beatrice. and to everyone who's joined us today via Zoom or online. And just to note that on the agenda, and ELF will be back next Thursday, the 12th of November, same time and same place, and there we will be discussing the results of the US elections and what that means for Europe. Another big geopolitical question. Okay, so until then, I wish you all a lovely day and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.